AITAH for refusing to tell my wife I love her more than my dad? This started as a stupid argument. That's honestly the best way I can describe it. The kind of argument that feels small when you say it out loud, but somehow grows into something that makes both people dig their heels in and refuse to budge. We both think we're right, so I'm letting Reddit decide. My dad babysat for us last night so my wife and I could go out on a date. This wasn't a last-minute thing. We planned it in advance, and my dad was happy to help. He doesn't drive at night much anymore, so I picked him up and drove him over to our place before we left. Before we went out, my wife and I were very clear about one thing. We wanted the baby put down for the night by 8. We've been trying really hard to keep a consistent sleep schedule. Anyone with a baby knows how fragile that routine can be and how easily one off night can turn into several bad ones. We went on our date, had a genuinely good time, and didn't think about the house or the baby much at all. It felt nice to just be adults together for a few hours. When we got back, the lights in the living room were low. My dad was sitting on the couch, holding our baby, who was fast asleep on his chest. He immediately apologized. He said he was sorry the baby wasn't in the crib. He explained that every time he tried to put him down, the baby fussed and cried. And after a while, he just gave up and held him instead. He said he didn't want to wake him up completely. I could tell right away that my wife was upset. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. But if you know your partner well enough, you can feel it in the room when something is wrong. Her body language changed. Her tone changed. The energy shifted. I picked up the baby and took him to the crib to put him down properly. When I came back into the living room, my dad and my wife were whisper arguing. Not yelling. Not fighting, but tense, uncomfortable. I said we should probably head back, and my dad agreed. I drove him home like we had planned. On the way, he apologized again. He said the baby had been really fussy and probably just missed us. He thought the baby might have been anxious because it wasn't us putting him down. I told him he was probably right and that it wasn't a big deal. At the time, I meant it. By the time I pulled back into our driveway after dropping my dad off, the good mood from our date was completely gone. The house felt different when I walked in. Quieter, but not in a peaceful way. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like something unresolved is sitting in the middle of the room. My wife was in the living room, not really doing anything, just sitting there with that tense posture she gets when she's upset, but trying not to explode. She asked me what my dad said about her. The question caught me off guard. I hadn't even considered that she might think he said something negative. I told her honestly that he didn't say anything about her at all. He just apologized and said the baby was probably fussy because he missed us. That didn't help. She said the baby won't adjust to his sleep schedule unless we keep things consistent. She explained, again, why routine matters and how even small changes can throw everything off. I agreed with her. I told her she was right about consistency and that I understood why she was upset. I also said that it had been a long time since my dad had taken care of a baby and that we should probably cut him some slack. The moment I said that, I could see her expression change. She asked why I was taking his side over hers. That frustrated me because that wasn't how it felt to me at all. I told her I wasn't taking his side. I said we had a great night and I didn't want us to let something minor ruin it. To me, the night felt like a rare win for us. Time together, no stress, no interruptions. I wanted to protect that. She said it wasn't minor. She said I was supposed to back her up, not gossip about her with my dad. That accusation hit a nerve. I told her I didn't gossip about her. I didn't complain about her. I didn't say anything negative. All I did was drive him home, like we had already planned to do before the night even started. She asked why I drove him home when she was clearly upset. I paused because I genuinely didn't understand what she wanted from me in that moment. I asked her what else I was supposed to do. Leave him standing outside? Change the plan at the last second? She said I could have ordered him a rideshare or a cab. That caught me off guard. Not because it was impossible, but because it had never been discussed. The plan was always for me to drive him home. I said that. I reminded her that this wasn't some spontaneous decision I made after she got upset. She responded with sarcasm. Right, because we have to stick with the almighty plan. At that point, the conversation stopped being about the baby. I asked her why she didn't just tell me she wanted me to do something different. I told her that if she had said, I need you here right now, we could have talked about it. She asked me if I would have done it if she had asked. I was honest. I said I wasn't sure, because of the cost and the delay. It wasn't a reflexive no, it was just reality. Calling a rideshare late at night, waiting around, dealing with timing, all of that mattered in the moment. She said, exactly. To her, that was proof that I would always choose convenience, or my dad, over her feelings. I told her we still could have talked about it. That communication goes both ways. She said I was always trying to sit on the fence when I should be on her field. That line stuck with me, because in my mind, I was on her field. I agreed with her about the routine. I agreed that consistency matters. I didn't dismiss her feelings. I just didn't think the situation required turning my dad into the villain of the night. But to her, neutrality felt like betrayal. That's when the argument took a turn I didn't expect. She asked me who I loved more, her or my dad. The question felt surreal. It didn't feel like a fair question, and it didn't feel like one that had a right answer. It felt like a trap. I told her it was a crazy question and that I wasn't going to answer it. She said she needed to know. I tried to explain that I don't rank the people I love. I told her I love my wife as my wife, and I love my dad as my dad. They aren't competing roles. They aren't interchangeable. Love isn't a numbered list. She didn't see it that way. She said I was an asshole for not choosing her. And I told her I wasn't, because to me, love doesn't work like a Watch Mojo countdown of top 10 people I love most. I wasn't refusing to choose her out of spite. I was refusing because the question itself felt wrong. But by that point, neither of us was really listening anymore. After she said I was an asshole for not choosing her, the room went quiet in that very specific way where you both know the argument isn't over, but neither of you knows how to move forward without making it worse. I sat there trying to understand what she was really asking me for. On the surface, it sounded simple. She wanted reassurance. She wanted to feel like she came first. She wanted to know that when there was conflict, even a small one, I would be firmly, unquestionably on her side. But the more I thought about it, the more complicated it felt. Because in my mind, I was on her side. I agreed with her that consistency matters. I agreed that the baby should have been put in the crib. I didn't dismiss her frustration. I didn't tell her she was overreacting. I didn't tell her she was wrong. I acknowledged all of that. What I didn't do was turn my dad into an enemy. And that seemed to be the part she couldn't accept. She told me that marriage means backing your spouse up even when they're not in the room. That it means presenting a united front, especially to family. That it means not making excuses for someone who crossed a boundary we had both agreed on. I tried to explain that I wasn't excusing him. I was contextualizing what happened. There's a difference between saying this was fine and saying this wasn't malicious. To me, intent matters. My dad didn't ignore our instructions because he didn't care. He tried, failed, and made a judgment call in the moment, but every time I said that, she heard something else. She heard that I was minimizing her feelings. She heard that I cared more about my dad's comfort than her frustration. She heard that her role as the baby's mother was being undercut. And once that interpretation settled in her mind, everything I said just reinforced it. She brought up other moments. Not specific events, but patterns. Times when she felt like I tried to smooth things over instead of taking a hard stance. Times when she felt like I prioritized keeping the peace over standing firmly beside her. She said it made her feel alone, like she was fighting battles by herself while I hovered somewhere in the middle. That hurt because I don't see myself that way at all. I don't avoid conflict because I don't care. I avoid unnecessary conflict because I do care. I don't like escalation. I don't like turning small mistakes into moral failures. I don't like forcing people into good guy and bad guy roles when reality is usually messier than that. But trying to explain that only made things worse. She told me that from her perspective, neutrality is a choice. And that choice always favors the person who caused the problem. In this case, she believed that person was my dad. I pushed back on that. I said there was a difference between supporting her emotionally and condemning someone else completely. I said I could validate her frustration without throwing my dad under the bus. That's when she said I was sitting on the fence. That phrase bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Because fences exist between two opposing sides, and I didn't feel like there were two sides in the way she was framing it. To me, there was just a situation where multiple people had feelings, and no one had acted out of malice. But to her, that framing felt like avoidance. She said she needed me to choose her unequivocally, not just in principle, but in practice. Not, I agree with you, but not, I understand, however, just, you're right, I've got you. End of discussion. And that's where I started to feel uncomfortable. Because while I love my wife deeply, I don't believe love means abandoning nuance. I don't believe it means rewriting reality to prove loyalty. And I don't believe it means ranking the people in my life like competitors in a contest. When she asked me who I loved more, her or my dad, it felt like all of that complexity got flattened into a single, impossible question. I understand why she asked it. I really do. She was looking for certainty. She was looking for reassurance that she wasn't second place. She was looking for a clear signal that our marriage outranked every other relationship in my life. But the way the question was framed made it feel less like reassurance and more like a loyalty test. And I've always struggled with loyalty tests, because once you start measuring love that way, there's no end to it. Today it's my dad. Tomorrow it's a friend. Next week it's a job. The question stops being, do you love me? And becomes, can you prove it in the way I demand, even if it feels wrong to you? I told her again that I don't rank love. I told her that loving her as my wife doesn't require loving my dad less. I told her that different relationships occupy different places in my life, and comparing them doesn't make sense to me. She told me that was a cop-out. She said that when push comes to shove, she needs to know that she's number one, that if I can't say that out loud, then maybe I'm not as committed as she thought. That scared me, not because I don't love her enough, but because it made me realize how differently we think about loyalty. To her, loyalty meant exclusivity and prioritization. To me, loyalty meant fairness, consistency, and not betraying my own values to satisfy a moment of anger. We went back and forth like that for a while, circling the same points, neither of us willing to budge. Eventually, the argument burned itself out, not because it was resolved, but because we were both exhausted. But even after the words stopped, the tension didn't. I lay awake that night thinking about whether I had actually failed her in some fundamental way, or whether I was being asked to perform a version of love that didn't feel honest to me. And that's why I'm here. Because on one hand, I understand why my wife felt hurt and unsupported. On the other hand, I don't think refusing to rank the people I love makes me an asshole. But maybe I'm missing something. The more I replayed the argument in my head, the more I realized that this was never really about the baby or the crib. Those things were just the trigger. What we were actually fighting about was something much heavier and much older. The fear of not being chosen. My wife eventually told me that what hurt her most wasn't that my dad held the baby instead of putting him in the crib. It was the feeling that, in that moment, she was standing alone. That she was the only one enforcing the rules we had agreed on, while I seemed more concerned with making sure no one felt uncomfortable. She said it made her feel like the bad guy. Like she was the strict one, the unreasonable one, while I got to play the role of the calm mediator who smoothed things over with everyone else. That stung, because I could see how it might look that way from her perspective. She explained that when it comes to parenting, especially with a baby, consistency isn't optional. It's not a preference, it's survival. Sleep schedules aren't just about convenience. They're about sanity, mental health, and feeling like you have some control in a phase of life that can feel overwhelmingly chaotic. When my dad didn't follow the plan, she didn't just see a harmless mistake. She saw the beginning of a pattern she's afraid of. Other people deciding that our rules are flexible, while she's the one left dealing with the fallout. And when I responded with understanding instead of outrage, she felt like I was siding against her authority as a parent. She said something that stuck with me. She said, "When you don't back me up, it feels like I'm fighting for our family by myself." I don't think she meant it as an accusation. I think she meant it as a confession. But even understanding that, I still struggled with the solution she seemed to want. Because to her, backing her up meant more than agreeing with her privately. It meant demonstrating outwardly and clearly that her position outweighed everyone else's, including my dad's. It meant drawing a hard line and making it obvious that crossing her boundary had consequences. To me, that felt extreme. Not because I don't respect her boundaries, but because I don't believe every mistake needs a show of force to be corrected. I believe intent matters. I believe context matters. And I believe that not every situation benefits from escalation. That's where our values started to collide. She views marriage as an alliance, a team that presents a unified front to the outside world at all times. From that perspective, any hesitation, any nuance, any attempt to see another angle feels like disloyalty. I view marriage as a partnership grounded in shared values, not blind allegiance. I believe in supporting my spouse, but not at the cost of abandoning fairness or compassion. I don't think love requires me to demonize other people to prove my commitment. And that difference became painfully clear when she asked me to choose. Who do you love more? I've thought about that question more than I want to admit. Not because I didn't know the answer she wanted, but because I genuinely couldn't reconcile the question with how I experience love. I love my wife deeply. She is my partner, the mother of my child, the person I chose to build a life with. My love for her is romantic, committed, and intentional. I also love my dad. He raised me. He showed up for me in ways I didn't fully understand until I became a parent myself. My love for him is different, rooted in gratitude, history, and responsibility. Those loves don't compete in my head, but to her, refusing to rank them felt like refusing to prioritize her. She told me that in a marriage, your spouse should always come first. That's what commitment means to her. That's what makes her feel safe. And when I wouldn't say it out loud, when I wouldn't give her the verbal confirmation she needed, she interpreted it as hesitation, as doubt, as proof that there was always someone else I might choose over her. That scared her. And if I'm honest, that scared me too. Not because I don't want to choose her, but because I don't want my love to be measured by how loudly I reject others. I tried to explain that my refusal wasn't about loving her less. It was about refusing to reduce love to a hierarchy. I told her that asking me to choose between her and my dad felt unfair because the roles they play in my life aren't interchangeable. She told me that sometimes fairness isn't the point. She said that when you're married, your spouse needs to know they come first, even if the comparison feels uncomfortable, even if the question feels illogical, even if the answer feels obvious. And that's where I felt stuck, because I understand her need for reassurance. I understand her fear of being second. I understand why she wants certainty instead of nuance. But I also know that saying, "I love you more than my dad," wouldn't actually solve the underlying issue. It would just be a performance. Words spoken to end an argument, not a reflection of how I truly understand my relationships. And if I say something I don't believe just to make the tension stop, what does that say about the kind of honesty we're building our marriage on? That night, after the argument finally died down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't just disagreeing. We were talking past each other. She was asking for emotional security. I was defending moral consistency, and neither of us knew how to translate our needs into a language the other could hear, which is why this feels bigger than a stupid argument. Because if we can't agree on what loyalty looks like, what does that mean for the future? As the argument lingered, I started to realize that my wife wasn't just reacting to what happened that night. She was reacting to everything it represented. She eventually admitted that this wasn't the first time she'd felt this way, just the first time it had boiled over. Ever since we became parents, she's been carrying a constant low-level anxiety that she rarely talks about, the kind that doesn't always announce itself clearly, but shows up in small, sharp moments. Becoming a mother changed her in ways that are hard to describe unless you've lived it. Suddenly, the stakes of everything felt higher. Sleep schedules weren't just preferences anymore. They were lifelines. Routines weren't just habits. They were the fragile scaffolding holding the day together. And when someone disrupted that, even unintentionally, it felt like a threat. She told me that when my dad ignored the plan, it triggered a fear she hadn't fully admitted to herself. The fear that her authority as a mother would be quietly overwritten by people who thought they knew better. That she would be expected to bend, to accommodate, to be flexible, while still being the one who dealt with the consequences when things fell apart. From her perspective, my reaction confirmed that fear. She didn't see compassion. She saw me prioritizing my dad's comfort over her sense of control in a time when she already feels stretched thin. She saw me smoothing things over instead of reinforcing the boundaries we had set together. And in that moment, she didn't just feel unsupported. She felt exposed. She told me something else that stuck with me. She said that when it comes to in-laws, especially after having a baby, there's an unspoken competition that no one admits exists, a constant comparison between the family you married into and the family you built. And every time I hesitated, every time I tried to be fair instead of firm, it made her feel like she was losing ground. I hadn't seen it that way before. To me, my dad helping out felt like exactly that. Help. He wasn't trying to assert authority. He wasn't trying to undermine us. He was just an older man doing his best with a fussy baby in the dark. But to her, intention mattered less than impact. She said that when she becomes the only one enforcing rules, she starts to feel like the bad cop in her own home, like she's constantly on edge, waiting for the next moment where she'll have to explain, again, why things need to be done a certain way. And when I responded with understanding instead of outrage, it made her feel like I was leaving her alone in that role. I tried to tell her that I wasn't asking her to bend or back down. I wasn't saying the rules didn't matter. I was saying that one imperfect night didn't require assigning blame. But that explanation didn't land. She told me that sometimes people don't need explanations. They need solidarity. They need to feel like their partner is standing shoulder to shoulder with them, not looking over at the other side and weighing options. And that's where the pressure started to build for me. Because what she was asking for wasn't just agreement. It was a performance of loyalty, a clear, visible rejection of my dad's position, not because he was malicious, but because she needed reassurance. And while I understand the emotional need behind that, something in me resisted the idea that reassurance should come at the cost of honesty. I kept thinking about the question she asked. Who do you love more? It felt like a demand to collapse my entire emotional world into a single sentence. To declare out loud that one relationship outranked another, as if love were a limited resource that had to be rationed. I know that in her mind, the answer should be obvious. Of course, a spouse comes first. Of course, the marriage should outrank all other bonds. But for me, love doesn't work that way. Loving my wife doesn't diminish my love for my dad. And loving my dad doesn't threaten my commitment to my wife. They exist in different categories, serve different emotional functions, and fulfill different parts of who I am. I worried that if I said the words she wanted, I love you more than my dad, it wouldn't actually resolve what she was feeling. It would just end the argument temporarily, while leaving the underlying insecurity untouched. And worse, it would teach us something dangerous. That the fastest way to end conflict is to say whatever sounds most loyal, even if it doesn't feel true. That scared me. Because I don't want our marriage to be built on declarations made under pressure. I want it built on trust, including the trust that we can disagree without turning love into a loyalty contest. But I also couldn't ignore the pain in her voice. She wasn't asking the question to trap me. She was asking it because she was afraid. Afraid of being second. Afraid of being overruled. Afraid that once again, she would be the one carrying the emotional weight while everyone else got to feel comfortable. And that realization complicated everything. Because suddenly, this wasn't about whether I was right or wrong. It was about whether my values, fairness, nuance, compassion, were enough to make my partner feel safe, and I didn't know the answer to that. After everything was said, after the argument lost momentum and the house finally went quiet, I was left with a feeling I couldn't shake. It wasn't anger, it wasn't resentment, it was doubt. Not doubt about whether I love my wife. I know that I do. But doubt about whether the way I understand love is compatible with the way she needs to feel loved. That question has been sitting with me ever since. When I replay the night in my head, I can see how small moments piled up into something bigger. A baby not put in a crib, a whispered argument, a car ride home, a decision that felt obvious to me, but felt dismissive to her. None of those things were catastrophic on their own. But together, they exposed a fault line we hadn't fully acknowledged before. I keep coming back to the idea of choosing. My wife believes that marriage requires choosing your spouse above everyone else, every time, without hesitation. That love is demonstrated through prioritization, through words and actions that make it unmistakably clear where your loyalty lies. I don't disagree with the importance of prioritizing your spouse, but I struggle with the idea that prioritization must come in the form of comparison. That in order to love one person fully, you must explicitly love someone else less. To me, love has never felt like a competition. I didn't refuse to answer her question because I wanted to hurt her or avoid commitment. I refused because the question itself felt wrong to me. It felt like asking me to flatten my emotional world into a hierarchy that doesn't exist in my mind. I love my wife as my wife. I love my dad as my dad. Those loves don't cancel each other out. They don't exist on the same scale. They serve different roles in my life, shaped by different histories, responsibilities, and bonds. Trying to rank them feels like comparing things that aren't meant to be compared. But I also have to be honest with myself. Just because something feels logical to me doesn't mean it feels safe to her. When she asked me who I loved more, she wasn't asking for a philosophical answer. She wasn't interested in nuance. She was asking for reassurance in the clearest way she knew how. She wanted to hear, without hesitation or caveats, that she comes first, and I didn't give her that. Instead, I gave her an explanation. I explained how I see love. I explained why I don't rank people. I explained why the question made me uncomfortable. All of that may have been true, but in the moment, it didn't meet the need she was expressing. That realization is uncomfortable because it forces me to confront the possibility that my commitment to being fair and principled might sometimes come across as emotional distance, that my refusal to take sides might feel like abandonment to someone who needs certainty. At the same time, I worry about the precedent of saying something I don't believe just to make an argument stop. If I say, "I love you more than my dad," to end this fight, what happens the next time she feels insecure? Or the time after that? Do I keep making declarations under pressure? Do I keep reshaping my truth to match the reassurance she needs in that moment? And what does that teach both of us about honesty? I don't want to live in a marriage where love is proven through loyalty tests, where reassurance only counts if it's framed as choosing one person over another, where nuance is seen as weakness and empathy for others is mistaken for disloyalty. But I also don't want to live in a marriage where my partner feels alone, unsupported, or second-guessing her place in my life. That's the tension I'm stuck in. I think part of what makes this so hard is that there isn't a clean villain here. My dad didn't act maliciously. My wife wasn't wrong to be upset. I wasn't trying to undermine her. Everyone involved was acting from a place that made sense to them, and yet the hurt is real. I've been asking myself whether this is one of those moments where being technically right doesn't matter, where the emotional cost of holding your ground outweighs the value of the principle you're defending. But I've also been asking whether constantly choosing peace over honesty slowly erodes something just as important. I don't want to be a fence sitter, but I also don't want to be someone who equates love with erasing other meaningful relationships. I want to be a good husband. I want to be a good father. I want to be a good son. And I don't know if those roles have to come at the expense of each other, or if we've just failed to communicate what they actually mean to us. Maybe what I should have said wasn't, "I don't rank people I love." Maybe what I should have said was, "You are my partner, and I choose you. Not because you beat someone else, but because I chose this life with you." Or maybe that still wouldn't have been enough. That's the part I can't answer. So now I'm here, asking strangers, because sometimes distance makes things clearer. Was I wrong for refusing to rank the people I love? Was I wrong for prioritizing honesty over reassurance in that moment? Was I wrong for trying to stay neutral when my wife needed me to be firmly on her side? Or is it reasonable to believe that love doesn't need to be proven by diminishing other bonds? I honestly don't know. AITAH